The story itself in this one is particularly good as well. Beyond just what I like about the writing, just the plot of it is good and shows the Johnny Craig thing that I really like, which is the more down to earth, like psychological horror and the social consequences and things like that, like picking apart social mores and just consequences of actions and things like that. So you have this artist here. He needs to make money, and he sees a car crash happen. That's the panel I was reading with this woman, and that inspires him. And he goes home and he makes this painting, and he knows it's the best thing he's done, but the subject matter's awful. So he goes to a lecherous old man, a collector that he knows who just wants disturbing stuff. You know, he's got too much money and he wants the awful things. The artist needs more money, so he starts like looking for inspiration and starts to engineer accidents and things like that so he can get more inspiration and keep making money. Eventually he meets this woman here, the Jaime Hernandez looking woman, falls in love, and she gets sick. She has a very serious condition and she needs a doctor, but the doctor needs $3,000 to operate. So he goes and he sets up another crime. Basically, he kills a guy and he uses that as inspiration and takes it to the old guy and gets his money. And then they're told, and this is where it's just really fucking dark ending to the story, but really good as well. They're told that, like, well, he can't operate her on her now. The only doctor that could help her got brutally murdered last night. His neck was broken, and then you realize that this main this main character kind of killed the one guy he needed. And again, I just think plot wise that's really well written. And like I said, the prose caught my eye and was really interesting. So just time wise, that worked out perfect to where I was on the last story, the titular story, Fall Guy for Murder, coming into the book. And I see a big chunk of prose right out the gate. So I said, okay, what I'm going to do is, by the way, before I get into that, I didn't mention it earlier, but Johnny Craig has a lot of drawings of artwork in the background, and they're always really good. There's really good compositions and like pretty detailed for how small they are. I find that very interesting. Anyways, back on track. So I set myself a task to read this story 4 times through. I was gonna read it 5 times through, but I decided I didn't need to read just the captions only. So I read it the first time through looking at only the art, kind of assessing how good of a storyteller is Johnny Craig just in pictures. And then I read it with how I would normally read it, with just the art and the word balloons. That's like how I'd normally read something, so caption heavy. And I'd see, okay, how much of the story, how much more do I understand about this with the words and the word balloons, the pictures and the word balloons combined. And then I went back and I just read it with only the art and only the captions and skipped the word balloons and see how that changed the experience. What did it add? How did it change it? My perception of the story. And then I went and I read it with the art, the word balloons, and the captions kind of all together, the way obviously Johnny Craig meant it to be read, and see how that changed the story. And I was going to read it with only the captions only, but I was pretty sick of reading the story at this point. Even though it's really good and really well done, I just read it 4 times in a row. I wish I could do this with everything, and I don't know. This did open up my mind to what really slow, thorough analysis could do for me personally, and I wish I had the time to delve into stuff more. But I'm gonna go ahead and say that this is pretty dense, and so I'm gonna edit this out and make this its own video. So this will come out the next day because I want to have the time to get into it and kind of show like what a deep reading of something could look like versus the way that I normally have to do it, just because I work so much and we're putting out so many of these videos and stuff. I just kind of read it, record a video, and move on. And that's not the best way to be a reader. So I really wanted to give Johnny Craig a thorough evaluation here. So I'm gonna do that and post it as its own video. I think would be the best idea. So I'll say in conclusion about the book overall, this really, really, I really like these old EC books. I'm going to try and get as many as I can. Obviously, there are certain artists that I think are significantly better than the others, so I'm going to focus on those. But I really, this opened my mind up to the value of the old EC comics that I think probably because I was reading, poor reproductions, and they were scans. There's basically, torrents that I pirated, because I couldn't get a hold of those works at the time that I was doing that in whatever 2007 or whenever I started doing that kind of thing. But they just weren't good reproductions, and I never took these seriously, even they're so important. And so that's something I'm glad that I'm starting to fill in for myself. And I think this is super valuable. And if they're all as well produced as this, then if you haven't got them, I'm super probably everyone else already has some of these. So this is nothing new to you. But if you haven't got them, they really are worth it. This is a really well done thing. And I probably need to get some EC artist editions at some point too, just because as good as these are in reproduction, I'm sure the original art's even a little more nuanced. So anyways, I basically have 4 reads worth of notes going on here, and at the end I have some notes about what I took away from each one, but I don't think I need to go through this 4 times back and forth. I think I can kind of cover what I learned from each read as I flip through. So on a read that included the everything, you really see the power of what Johnny Craig is doing with the combination of prose, literature, and comics. I think he's actually, from the stuff I've read from this time period, again, I haven't read a ton of, especially the EC stuff, this seems to be some of the more sophisticated stuff. So we basically have this character here, Greg Saunders, who's a private detective, and he's being hired by his old buddy. And his old buddy, Greg had been dating a girl, Edith, and this character here, Harry, was his best friend, who wound up with Edith. And Greg had been engaged to Edith, and then she wound up marrying Harry in the end. So you have these 2 friends that kind of have like this lifelong friendship, but also competitive nature to them that really, when you read it all together, really plays itself out. When I read through just looking at the art, it's obvious that someone got gaslit into murdering someone, basically. And then if you read it through with just the art and the word balloons, you get those extra details about, oh, this is Greg, this is Harry, this is Edith. You get some sense of the relationship. But what you don't get, which is very sophisticated, is that what's going on in the captions is like a first-person narration from Greg. So he's saying, my name is Greg Saunders. I've got a little card in my pocket issued by the police department of this city which says I'm a private detective. There's a pistol permit nestled right behind it for the benefit of any nosy cop who may get curious about the bulge under the left, blah, blah, blah. So you get what's really going on, and you kind of get like his perception of it. And within that, you start to get a much more nuanced picture of the battle of egos that's going on between the 2 characters. So there's a lot of hubris that is coming in this. I am a detective. I've got a gun. I've got this thing. Nobody has ever made a fool of me is one of the things that he says in there. And then there's a lot of really well observed kind of power dynamics going on when you see that. When you see the inside and the outside of their head, Craig uses that really well to show where the characters are lying to themselves, how they're deferring to each other, all of these kind of things. So he comes in with all this hubris and this arrogance, and like he's the better guy, and he kind of thinks he's the best. My reputation as a private eye who produced results kept my office phone ringing with an endless stream of anxious would-be clients. But when Harry Wilson called me, I dropped everything I was working on and hot-footed it to his apartment. Like, I'm doing the guy a favor, but he's butthurt and he's trying to resolve something for himself. And then when he comes in, like, Harry immediately says, I'm sorry for calling you, man. Like, I know how it was with you and Edith, but you're the only person I can turn to. So now you get into this really interesting interplay between the characters where Greg's coming in arrogant. Harry is actually the one who has won, but he's putting himself in the lower position. He's like playing to Greg's ego. He's saying like, I'm a bad person, I shouldn't have done this, but you're the only one that can do it. You're the best. And then that dynamic flips all of a sudden. Then Greg says, forget it, Harry. The best man got the girl. So this guy who has spent all this time internally saying how he's basically the best and he's so awesome, kind of lies to his friend. You know, he definitely thinks he's better and smarter than his friend, as you'll see as the story goes along. But in this moment, they're both kind of lowering themselves for the other. He even internally says 2 years before Harry Wilson had married the girl I'd been engaged to, Edith Colby. I'd been crazy about Edith, but it was just one of those things, the usual routine. Edith fell for him, handed me back the ring, and we parted. So it's all this devastating, like, she gave me back the ring and went to my friend, but, you know, whatever, no big deal. And that kind of casual lying to himself, I think, is really well handled. And you get him still kind of like stunting, trying to look really nice here, and this character being more open and, hey, she vanished without a note, and what? I'm sorry. Oh, I thought you two were getting along so well. So there he's like a little kind of like taking a shot, like, oh, really? Like you fucked it up, huh? That's interesting. And then he's honest to himself all of a sudden. He said, I never liked Harry Wilson. I'd only remain cordial to him in order to see Edith every now and then. So actually, he doesn't like the guy. He doesn't mean anything that he's saying. And he's probably most definitely not okay with the fact that she left him either. So there's all those plays going on. He said, that's fine. We were getting on very well. I can't understand it. So he's reasserting his dominance here. No, our marriage is fine. Don't get it twisted, buddy. It's just she disappeared and I need your help. And so, okay, we'll lead the way. And again, he's saying you lead the way. You know, you're the boss. Take charge here. So there's this just constant interplay in this of the characters' navigation of this social situation that I would not have got if I would have only read the captions. If I would have read the captions, I would have got the basics of the story, but I wouldn't got the kind of double talk, and I wouldn't have noticed the constant deferment back and forth of who's the better person. And that continues in a very sophisticated way, so I'm just going to go through and continue to break it down. But it's adding a sense of wealth to the art that's different than what I'm used to in captions. So even something like this, he led me into a nicely furnished bedroom, which is like, we can kind of see the bedroom here, but it just looks like any old bedroom. It doesn't really give a sense of how wealthy these people are. And that's what I mean, like, it adds a sense of wealth to the art, is he's describing, he slid back a large mirrored wardrobe door, which in this composition, which is a great composition, and you get a sense he's opening, there's everything you need to know to make the story make sense. He's showing her this closet, but you don't get that extra bit about how wealthy this guy is in comparison to him. It's a large mirrored wardrobe door, and then you get to see this and you get a better sense of the room. Here you get this kind of internal monologue again. Guys like Harry Wilson kill me. They sit in their offices and pull down their 20 grand a year, and they think they're smarter than the whole world. So he thinks he's the smartest, and then he's like, against this guy who's had more success than him, and he's like, yeah, well, he thinks he's so smart, but whatever, he's just not doing anything. So here you can see immediately he starts jabbing at him again because he doesn't like him. He says, all right, Harry, she left you. Why call me in? Because I want you to find her for me, Greg. So again, power play. And then there's some feigned disinterest here and some really interesting, like, I don't really care power plays. So, but then at the same time, he's showing intense interest as well. So there's a feigned disinterest and intense interest. Where he's internally trying to go, okay, well, what will I do to show my disinterest? I flipped a butt up from my pack and picked it out with my lips. I snapped the lighter and stared at the dancing flame. So he's feigning disinterest. It's like, I don't know, man. I'm just kind of looking at my cigarette. I'm not really here. And then here he's basically, again, feigning disinterest and saying, why not call the cops? They have departments to handle this kind of thing. But then here again, like in the internal captions, he's admitting his interest. I nodded and stood up. I peered at the empty bureau drawers, nosed around the bare closet, and then I turned to Harry. And then again, he feigns disinterest. So he's looking around. He's checking even while he's pretending not to. This isn't my sort of case, but it's for you, so I'll see what I can do. So now I'm doing you a favor. And so now he's in the power position because it's like, well, I'm doing this favor for you, even though you two really kind of boned me over. You stole my lady, but I'll do it as a favor for you. So now he's like the morally superior guy. And then Harry immediately like won't accept that, and then he's like, okay, I'm gonna pay you. How much do you want? Like money's no thing. So he reasserts his dominance. Like, no, you're not gonna do me a favor. You're my employee here. You're getting paid for this. And then that dynamic flips in the next panel, where it says, no, Harry. This is on me for old times' sake. And he's trying to reassert his claim, and I insist on paying you. It's the least I could do. So he's still trying to preserve his superiority, but he's saying, like, you're just so much better than me. Like, I really appreciate it. It's the least you could do. And that kind of back and forth, which makes itself more clear with the captions, is really really awesome again. And then this flips again, and you get a sense of paranoia for the Greg character. He's feeling that he's lost the battle and he's getting paranoid. I had to force myself to keep from swinging out and slamming his grinning teeth back down his throat. What kind of sap did he take me for? Did he think he was putting something over me? So, like, why is he trying to pay me? He's getting suspicious and paranoid of this guy because he feels himself losing the battle. And then he gets kind of angry. I said, no fee, Harry. Let's just call this a labor of love. I understand. And, like, he backs off in that case because he saw that the battle got a little too intense. But, like, he knows he's won. He knows he's got this guy. Harry knows that he's winning this. So he's, oh, okay, I understand. No big deal. I'll let you do it for free. You'll be the big man. And that's all just so well done and so interesting. So then you get Greg goes on. We can skip over some panels. I went down the elevator cursing, and he says, you can't kid me, you dirty fucker. You murdered Edith, and I'm going to prove it. So he's so bitter for losing that, and then he's also, like, again, feigning disinterest, but as he's walking out, I took one last look around the stripped bedroom and walked into the hall. I took my hat from the chair. So he's still being super observant while he's feigning disinterest, and in his paranoia and his he really wants Harry to be the bad guy so bad. So Harry is now seen as like, Edith didn't run away from you. You murdered her, you dirty fucker. He has to cast the guy in a bad light to continue moving on. And he now is going to admit that he does feel like he has lost the battle. Edith has always said Harry was clever. One had to be clever to be a successful stockbroker. One had to have imagination too. Well, it was the same in my racket, and Harry hadn't been so clever after all. Like, I caught him. You won one battle, but war's on, buddy. Like, you took my woman and you played this situation well, but I know you killed her. Women who leave their husbands don't pack up every blasted thing on their own. So he really feels like Harry killed her and has gotten rid of all of her stuff and is not as clever as he thinks he is, and Greg thinks he's more clever. So all really good. Really love this drawing of a cabbie, super Stan Drake, but juiced up a little bit. And again, in profile, for some reason, Johnny Craig in profile, I don't know if he just had trouble drawing in profile, so he uses photo reference, but every time he draws in profile, it looks more photographic to me and more like a particular person instead of just this kind of stock character. But he's also very aware in his paranoid state, Greg, that he may be being played. And so here, another thing, this is really interesting, is in all of this worked up that he is, and he's trying to assert for himself how morally superior he is, that he says that he gets a cab and the taxi stopped, I got out, paid off the driver with a fin. I don't know what that means, but probably a good amount of money, waved off the change and went inside the morgue. So I have money too. I can wave off the change. Like, I can let him keep that. Like, I paid him good. I was a nice guy. I overpaid the cabbie. So there's that. You can just see, and that's what I think. Like, God, Johnny Craig is actually showing me the way forward for how you combine prose and images in a way that really, really adds richness to it. A lot in 8 pages. He has smashed a lot in here. And it makes me rethink, why they were doing those captions, because they had such limited space. So you had to let the words carry more of that. You couldn't show him paying off the cabbie and letting that go. In a graphic novel today, that could have been like a whole 5-page sequence where you see this ego trip playing out, or this struggle to maintain the ego. But here they're doing it with words, and that's really inspirational to me, because as I've talked about on the channel many times, I have some stories I want to tell that should, if I do them right, be richly interior like this. But I hadn't thought about using captions because I don't like them, and I was worried that I would need, thousands of pages to get across what I was trying to do, and the time that I have, I can only work in 70 to 140 page books maybe is reasonable for me every few years. So captions bring back that power where I could tell a richer story, and so I really appreciate that. But anyways, you get the cabbie waved off, and then you also get in that all the way downtown, I kept trying to figure Harry's angle. Where did I fit in? Why did he pull me into his scheme? Was it to be his dupe or his alibi? So he's aware that he might be being played, but his ego kind of keeps him going anyways and blinds him to what's going on. He also feels a bit shielded here, I think, by his badge and the system. So here he goes into his the last stop was a drugstore. He's going around kind of tracking some information down, and he says, I flashed him my PI card, and you can see this like a shield over his heart or something. So he's paranoid that he might get played, but he really feels hidden behind the system here and shielded by his status within the system, which is interesting because that's what the system is supposed to do, right? The system, society, is supposed to take the weaker person in nature, where might makes right, and it shifts that. It puts up protection for the physically weaker, but within that, physically weaker people can become very strong within the system, obviously, and so you get corporate crooks and stuff like this. And this is kind of a weak-minded character who thinks he's very strong-minded, and is letting the system fool him into that. And that's symbolized, very intensely by the badge over his heart, I think. So I'm assuming Johnny Craig meant all this. I don't think I'm overreading, because it's all pretty, obvious that this is what it's about. And this is also, the titular title. So I think Fall Guy for Murder is probably acknowledged, I'm assuming, as one of Craig's masterpieces, and this would be why. Now this character is having to feign some stupidity to sell a lie. So the drugstore guy is basically in on the gag that's being played. Not the gag, but he's in on the gaslighting that's going on, as far as I can tell. So he's kind of feigning stupidity here about the characters, and he said, I'm an amateur psychiatrist, and you can tell so much about people by what they read. So he's a gas store attendant, but he needs to lead Greg to the next clue to put him down the wrong path. But he has to feign stupidity to make him bite. Because if he was acting too knowledgeable, that wouldn't stroke Greg's ego. And he has to basically throw that out there, like, oh, he came in and he checked out a lot of books. Really? What books? And he said, I don't know. I never really paid attention to it. I like what people check out. So I paid attention to what he was doing. But he's kind of acting like he doesn't have information to give, and he leaves it to Greg to bite. Like, really? You have a record of this? What books? What books got borrowed? Here, this is a really strange drawing. Someone else drew that or inked it. Doesn't look like Johnny Craig at all, especially in profile. He is way better than in profile. But he brought out some small index cards. And then, yes, here we are. Here's the record right here. Starts with the blood red-headed blonde. And he basically has to be shown the clue. Like, here's the clue. Let me give you the clue. I started copying down the titles of all the books Harry had borrowed. It was incredible. He'd taken out 2 or 3 and brought them back, and it's like, oh, this is so good. And then again, he has to be shown the clue. He's going through it, and then this guy said, like, so he's wrapped up in it. He's feeling good. There's a lot of negging going on in this. Like, he's has these things taken away from him, and then this carries out here too. And then he has the next piece given to him. So he's feels like he's doing this himself. And then they give him this last little thing, which is going to supposedly lead him to the information he needs. Then he goes on and he's like, okay, well, so Harry Wilson was supposed to have an imagination. Harry Wilson was supposed to be clever. Well, he wasn't clever enough to plan a murder. He had to get it out of a book. So there's like some moral superiority here too, like in sense of he couldn't even make this up on his own. Like, what? He's not that great. And then here, to sell the lie even more, the person who's in on it says that this one particular book never got turned in, so he had to pay for it. And that's again making this character feel morally superior. He's got all this money, and he stole a book and he had to pay for it, and then he never borrowed another one because he was so sore about it. So he's being sold this lie all the way through that feeds into his ego. And then he continues to see, you can see him continuing to try and be a nice guy. Like, every time that he goes and talks to someone, they're like, oh, sorry, that the Fall Guy for Murder was never included in our mystery collection. And he's like, oh, okay, thanks anyways, no big deal. He's seething inside, but he's trying to be a nice guy. And then you see immediately afterwards that he's actually really a creep. And that shows up both in how Johnny Craig draws the art and just in his actions. I tried 2 bookstores and a used bookshop with no luck, but there was only one way to read that book. I made a phone call. So now he's like, all right, there's only one way to read the book. I got to sneak into this guy's house. And you see the shift in the art, and then he's just being a creepy stalker. You get all of these dark shadows over his face. So he, again, is fooling himself into thinking he's a really nice guy to everyone around him, but he's a hell of a creep. So he breaks in to read this book. And really love the panel here where he's holding the book, and Johnny Craig set it up so that it almost looks like his thumb is wrapping around to this thumb, and that this is his hand on the trigger. So you get some visual and Fall Guy for Murder. So you're getting a lot of very intense foreshadowing here, both in the pictures and in the title of the book. And again, Greg, in all of his arrogance, isn't seeing the foreshadowing. So it's not like Johnny Craig is being a bad writer by making the foreshadowing too obvious. The point of this whole story is it's been obvious all along, and this guy's ego is stopping him from seeing it, which is really, really cool. Here, Harry had been really dumb. All mystery books have a solution. Didn't he know that? So he still thinks that Harry was following the book to the T, and he thinks that he'll be able to outsmart Harry by just reading ahead in the book, that he'll be able to see how this all plays out. And then he's saying, oh, well, this is written in the first person by a private eye. So now, like, we're kind of in this meta loop where this story itself is written by a detective in the first person. But it also means that he's like leaning into this idea that he's the hero of the story, right? This is mimicking his own interior narrative, that he's the tough guy detective. And again, formally it makes sense that it's in this first person, like, detective interior narration that you would get in a crime noir story. That's being leveraged here by Johnny Craig in a really smart way, to add all this depth, but also that lets the character, who's obviously obsessed with this kind of detective lifestyle, to then associate himself with the, quote, hero in the book. And he's talking about Harry being dumb, but right at that point, we're really finding out how dumb the narrator is. That he's still not seen it in this situation. And then he says, it was an ironic coincidence. It became more ironic as I went. So again, the irony of this whole story is on full display, but he's not seeing it. he's saying why it's the almost exact same situation. This private eye is called in by the husband of his ex-sweetheart. It seems she's disappeared. And that, again, lets him see himself as the hero. So then the captions are used to tell you a bit about what's going on in the narrative. And these balloons here, now you know that you're looking at the fictional detective here. In the book, the husband made the same mistake. He cleaned out everything from the wife's closets and drawers. The private eye noticed this as I had done. I'm just as good as this guy. Not like, hey, this is already pre-written and I'm so predictable that this guy knew exactly what I was going to do and how I was going to respond, but I'm the hero. As he goes forward, though, he starts to lose some confidence because it starts matching up too much and he starts getting paranoid again. My head was whirling as I sat there in Harry's silent apartment. Harry knew all this. Then he knew I'd find out about his borrowing books, losing one, because the character in the book basically goes to the the druggist and has the same conversation, all of that. And so it's like, wait, he knows all this about me. So why did he do it? What is his game? He should have at this point been like, nah, this is too weird. I bail out. But I loosened my collar and read on. The private eye in the book went on to the husband's apartment and left himself in with the master key. So now it's playing out exactly like you're there. And the meta exposition here becomes much, much more interesting thing. And it's also a really interesting trick where basically you get a dual exposition. Like normally in a mystery book, the exposition unfolds everything that happened before that you hadn't picked up on for you and ties it all together. But this is an interesting thing where he hasn't read the end of the story yet. So as he's reading through, the meta exposition kind of goes backwards, like this is what you've been through already, and then it tells him exactly where it's going to go, and then he falls for it anyways, which is really, really funny to me as a story. Things were getting too close to home. Everything was pat, too parallel. If Harry knew from reading Fall Guy for Murder that I'd come to the apartment, what was he planning? I had to read on because the book's going to give it away to me. And then, yeah, you get the kind of forward, like what happens. He's going to get shot. And basically, the end of the book has this guy coming in, the quote, the Harry character, the husband, steps out of the shadows and shoots the private eye. So this was all some setup to kill the private eye. He said, except for the traffic in the street far below, there was no sound. I slipped my gun from my shoulder holster, knocked off the safety catch. Harry's timing was off. I started reading fast. I had to know what the gimmick was, the solution. In the book, the fatally wounded private eye heard the husband's voice as he was dying. I stopped by the drugstore for cigarettes. I found out you learned about my reading habits. I know you'd come back here to read the book, just to see how I murdered my wife. And so it's like, now I gotta take you out. I had to read fast. Harry would be here in a minute. In the book, the husband raved on as the private eye was fading. I'll tell the cops I shot you in self-defense. I'll tell them that I shot you after you confessed murdering my wife out of jealousy, packed her things and removed them. So now he thinks, oh, okay, he's basically got the idea that he murdered his wife and he's gonna trick me into being the fall guy. So that's what it was. And it's like, now that I know this, I'm gonna be able to stop this whole situation from happening. Like, I'm still cleverer. Also, right here, some real apex inking. But right here, he's really finally bitten the hook big time. Like, all these warnings of coincidence, he's able to write off as like, this is all just pre-planned, and he's gonna kill me and blame me for his wife's murder. And so he's determined not to let that happen. And like that leads to the actual thing that he's been set up for, which is killing the woman himself. I'll give it away here. Here he says there's some really interesting stuff in the dialogue. I fingered the trigger with my revolver nervously. I made like I was reading. So now this is in reality. He hears supposedly Harry coming in, and so he continues to pretend reading as he's getting his gun ready. But I really like the next couple lines here. I made like I was reading, but I didn't see anything. I think that's really important. This whole time he's been reading the situation, but not seeing anything. I think that's a really well written line. I was listening and then I heard it, the unmistakable sound behind me, I whirled firing. But I think within that, like I was reading, but I didn't see anything. There's a pretty intense critique of what this character's been up to. So here, then he loses basically. He read it, but he didn't see anything that was going on. So he turns around to shoot this character coming in, and then here you see the real horror in this story is the horror of losing, the horror of realizing that you're not as smart as you are, and that's where I say Johnny Craig is like, really, he's picking up on those kind of subtle psychological horrors. Like, that's an awful thing to realize you're not as clever as you are. I mean, I think all of us experience that. I've had lessons like that multiple times in my life, especially younger, like smart guy but don't know much. You tend to get ahead of yourself, and you have to learn in retrospect. And that's pretty psychologically painful sometimes. So there's that throughout the story being way more horrific, and I really wouldn't have got any of that, the deference of power, the ego play, all of the subtle manipulations, how he's kind of interiorly writing and interpreting this situation. None of that would have came if I didn't read the captions. Basically, the only thing I got in the art read through is that this was about some guy who was gaslit into killing his own wife, is what I wrote. That's what I thought was going on here. With the word balloons, I was able to pick out that it was old friends and romantic competitors turned a detective by gaslighting him into killing his wife, and that this had something to do with this book, but I didn't know exactly what that had to do with the book. And then when I read it all together, obviously I'm getting all of this nuance out of it. And then at the end here, we get, again, this whole thing has really been about this long-standing competition between these two people who are supposedly friends, but obviously just really hate each other. You get, in the end, you see that all along, Harry was definitely the smarter guy. He knew exactly how to manipulate this guy. And he comes in and he says it to him. He's like, if you weren't such a good detective, my little plan never would have worked so well. So that's even more painful. It's like, you're good. You are very good, but I'm better. Like, this wouldn't have worked so well if you weren't good. You just met your match. You met someone who's better for you. So that's another thing, is that the Greg character is a really smart character. He's not a dumb guy, but the ego's in the way, and that's a really good lesson about ego. And that's what I was saying, younger, even a lot of times these days, like, my ego gets in the way, and my intelligence and skill and stuff lets me sell to myself that I'm right about something when I'm not. That's the danger of being, like, legitimately pretty intelligent, is you can take that for granted and quit questioning yourself. And the real long game thinkers are probably, they'll meet their match eventually, maybe, but they're probably keeping more aware of that. So the plot is told, the exposition then comes back in, and you find out why. Is that I just met someone else, Greg. Edith stood in the way of my happiness. Thanks to you, I'm rid of her. That's the story. Harry made me kill Edith for him. It was a diabolically clever scheme. I remembered how his evil eyes twinkled as the sirens resounded below, how he picked up the book I'd just read. And this, fall guy for murder, my whole plan depended on this book. You see, Greg, I wrote it. And that's like that real gloat of the battle, the ego of the villain having to do the exposition because he really wants the other guy to know, like, you lost, I am superior. And all of that's just, the reason I spent so much time with this story is because all of that's so well done and so fascinating and so acutely observed about human behavior, so well written, so well drawn. I really truly think this is an 8-page masterpiece and has given me a lot of strategies for how to pack a lot into a small space, which I'm most definitely grateful to Johnny Craig for, and I will be using going forward. Again, I wish I could do this type of super deep read with everything I've done. Look at it once with the pictures. Look at it once with the pictures and the word balloons. Look at it once with all three if it have captions. And read things multiple times as well, because you're able to notice the structure of a story better once you know it's in place. Like, I always, as a teacher, I know my class start to finish, and I know the whole structure of it. So every little piece makes sense in relationship to every little piece in the kaleidoscope I'm making of my class, because the subject exists in my head multidimensionally. But then I have to flatten it out into like two-dimensional kind of linear steps for my students. You do this, and then you do this, and then you do this, and you do this. And same with comics. You read this, you read this, you read this, you read this. It's only at the end of the semester where the students finally see the full structure and see it potentially the way I have it in my mind, but they haven't been able to leverage that at any point along the way in their understanding. So I almost wish I could always teach my classes forwards and then backwards. There's just not time for that. And I wish that I could read that way. I wish I could read books at least 2 times, maybe 3 times in a row. I just don't have time. And this would be a really good kind of way to do that, is in the reading, look at the art, pick up what you can, learn what you can about storytelling, look at what you can about the art itself. But that will also give you an overview of the structure without you having to really read it, and then read it at least one more time with the words and the caption, the word balloons and the captions. But maybe even read it, once with the words and once with the captions, or read it all twice the way through with all the stories so you get all the details. I think that would be, my ideal way to do these reviews. Unfortunately, I just don't have the time for it. In the reading this stuff in the back about Johnny Craig's life, I noticed that they kept using the term Picto-fiction. I'm familiar with that. I've heard it before, but it's one of those things that I've forgotten. And when I read it, I go, oh yeah, duh. And then this made sense. These guys were doing Picto-fiction. And like, this is really a combination of prose writing, literature, and illustration in a way that we tend to think about comics. It's just done very well. It's not usually done this well. So that's an interesting idea to me, Picto-fiction. Something that's really like a half, like, and you look at, even on the page, it's on a page like this, it's about half art and half words, whereas in most modern comics, it would be mostly art and very little words. And that's always like my preference in books too, is, God, don't give me so many words. I'm buying a picture book for a reason. But I'm going back now and thinking, oh man, you're able to stuff in so much with all the words. So that idea of, it's still comics, but it's a really different approach than what we see in most things today, and really, really different from what I would usually go out of my way to spend time consuming. Like I said, if there's captions in books, I just skip over them and I feel like I'm still getting the story. It's really making me like, okay, I need to read the captions again and all that kind of stuff. So thinking about it as Picto-fiction, I like that. And then really like seeing some of these pictures here of the covers. Again, these are the things that I associate with Johnny Craig. So when I see the work on the inside that looks more like these, I go, okay, that's Johnny Craig. Whereas the more Milt Caniff, Eisner type of looking stuff is less Johnny Craig to me. The interesting story about this one, if you've not got this book and read it, is that when Gaines was at the Senate trials, they're asking him about this cover in particular, one of the famous kind of images, this woman with her head cut off. And here, I'll just read it because it's so interesting. This seems to be a man with a bloody axe holding a woman's head up, which has been severed from her body. Do you think that is in good taste? Gaines replied that he thought it was, for the cover of a horror comic, he qualifies, and then went on to dig his grave deeper. A cover in bad taste, for example, might be defined as holding her head a little bit higher so that the blood could be seen dripping from it, and moving the body down a little further over so that the neck of the body could be seen to be bloody. So basically pulling the image down further so there's a bunch of blood dripping out of here. Imagine if you didn't have this, you had the whole image up and then the body laying on the floor with the cut off head. And here the senator replies, well, you've got some blood coming out of her mouth. And he says, yeah, a little. What Gaines was describing in such lurid detail, unbeknownst to the senators and the television audience, was in fact the actual cover that Craig had originally drawn, blood dripping from the neck, as Gaines recalled it. You could see the bottom of the severed neck and blood dripping out. I said, Johnny, move the cover up so the bottom of the page cuts off the whole thing and there isn't any blood. So this is actually an instance where Gaines had some foresight and said, bro, that's like too much. Like, crop it a little bit. And you can see, like, they just use this here. They probably had to blow up and lose some of this as well, because this is the standard size of the cover. But they cropped it, and that still was a 1. So that, I found that very interesting as well. Anyways, thanks for joining me for this second version of this, where I go super in depth into just this one story. I hope you've enjoyed that. I can't say that I'll be doing that a lot, but I think in this case it was very worthwhile, and one of those things where I just got a bug up my ass and it really paid off. So I just tend to follow those instincts, and really worked this time. So I really enjoyed this. I'm really looking forward to, I got another 4 or 5 of these maybe that I'm really looking forward to digging into. So check back, keep an eye out for those. They'll be coming out periodically. Me looking at these, and then I'll definitely, as I can, get more of the EC library. I don't think I'll get the whole thing because I don't like all the artists, but who knows? You never know. I might, I didn't used to like captions either, so we'll see. If you enjoy what we're doing here on the channel and you want to support us, there's 2 ways to do that. The first is through our Patreon. We have 2 different tiers of engagement there. At the first level of engagement and support, you'll just get early access to our videos. At the second level of engagement, you'll get early previews of the books that Sean and I are working on, our private work, sketches, things like that we put up there periodically. And then we also do an ongoing web comic experiment in AI art, Pranede, where the people who subscribe to that tier can help vote with what happens next in the story. So we really appreciate that support. And any of the money that we get from that just goes back into buying the books that we review. So we try and put that back into the industry in other ways, keep the channel rolling, keep you in reviews to check out. That's really appreciated. So if you want to support Living the Line itself, the best thing to do is to support what Sean's doing with Living the Line Publishing. We'll go ahead and take a look at one of his projects now. The Eisner nominated The Strange Death of Alex Raymond by Dave Sim and myself. This is a gorgeously illustrated and designed book. Dave doing most of the illustration. Amazing compositions throughout. What Dave is doing is he's recording his obsession with the death of master cartoonist Alex Raymond behind the wheel of Stan Drake's car when they got into a car crash. The best description of the book that I've heard is that it's like understanding comics with pages like this, mixed with something like From Hell when you get into the theories about what actually happened with the car crash. And then with Sean on production, it's just one of the most gorgeously printed books you could get a hold of. Thanks for following along. Take it away, Jack.